When you're looking to install solar and battery onto your home in the UK, you'll quickly encounter a key player in the process, the DNO. DNO stands for Distribution Network Operator, and your local DNO is responsible for ensuring your solar and battery setup is safe and compliant before it's connected to the national grid. They'll also advise you of any export limitation, essentially the maximum amount of power you're allowed to send back to the grid. And with plenty of other questions, I was fortunate to be invited to meet the UK's Energy Networks Association at their headquarters in London, together with some of their member DNOs. The session was recorded and I hope you find it informative. So here I am in central London. Shortly I'll be meeting with Energy Networks Association, together with a few of their member networks, Northern Power Grid, UK Power Networks and Scottish and Southern Electricity Networks. Okay, here's where the meeting is taking place. I'll see you in there. So thanks everyone for inviting me here today at Energy Networks Association's headquarters here in London. Perhaps to get started we could do a round of introductions. I'll start with myself. I'm Gary Waite. I run a YouTube channel called Gary Does Solar, and it seeks to educate and inform people about solar and related technologies. Neil.
Morning Gary, I'm Neil Madgwick. I work in the connections business at UK Power Networks, and we are the distribution network operator for London, the South East and the East of England.
Hi Gary, thanks for coming to have a chat today. I'm Gillian Williamson and I'm Head of System Forecasting at Northern Power Grid. So Northern Power Grid are the distribution network operator for the North East, for Yorkshire and North Lincolnshire. And system forecasting, well, our sole purpose is to future-proof our network to make sure that our customers can connect their electric vehicle chargers and heat pumps.
Fantastic.
Yeah, good to meet you, Gary. I'm Stuart Reid. I'm the Head of Future Networks at Scottish and Southern Electricity Networks, and we're the network operator for the north of Scotland and south central England. And my role is looking at the future challenges that the network's going to face and making sure we've got the innovation projects and things in place to make sure we're ready for all the things that are coming our way.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay.
Hi Gary, welcome to ENA's offices. ENA are the trade association for the electricity network operators across GB and Ireland. My role is to support the innovation function across all of the networks and also the low carbon technologies and future networks function as well, provide consistency and collaboration across all of our members.
Brilliant. So in preparation for this meeting I put out a call to my Patreon members for questions to ask you all. And they didn't disappoint. So perhaps, Stuart, I could start the first question with yourself. You know, for many people, the first time they come across the term DNO is when they are looking to get solar panels installed on their own property. What actually is a DNO, and how many are there in the UK, and what remit and responsibilities do they have, and how does that all relate to Energy Networks Association?
Yeah, very good and very common question, that one. DNO, Distribution Network Operator, is part of a whole chain of different organisations that run the electricity networks and run the electricity system in the UK. And it's maybe worth just kind of starting off what that chain looks like. I'm not going to pick every single organisation off, but you have your generators who are a group in their own right. Then you have your retailers who are the people that buy and sell electricity through the network. Yeah? You then have your transmission operators who are the people that own the transmission network, which is the big towers that you see moving large amounts of energy through the country. Then you have the distribution network operators who look after the distribution system. I'll come back to that in a minute.
Yeah.
And then you've also got things like the meter operators as well that look after meters and so on. Yeah. So jumping back to the distribution network operator, what we are responsible for is the wires, the substations, the cables that go from the meter at the generator to the meter in your home. Right. We don't do anything with the meters themselves, but right up to the meter, we look after everything in between. So that's the distribution network operators. We each have, there's 6 of us, and we each have a defined geographical area. But it's worth pointing out as well as another 2 entities, which we've not mentioned so far, one called IDNOs, Independent Distribution Network Operators. So you get little islands of network within a DNO is either owned by a completely different organisation. That's an independent network operator.
Okay.
And there's also a thing called independent connection providers, who can actually build a connection to your new home, for example, yeah, and they hand over the network to the distribution network operator when it's finished. It's to allow a bit of competition in the way that people get their connections. So I'll stop there because it can make it a lot more complicated, but that's the basic structure, yeah. Now, what are we responsible for? Well, I suppose the first thing and the most fundamental thing is safe and efficient networks. You're sort of moving the energy around the country in a safe and efficient manner. We're regulated. So Ofgem, you'll hear Ofgem referred to in the news quite regularly. They regulate us, and so we're monopolies, and that's why we're regulated. And they set the rules and standards in terms of how we the sort of things we do for customers, things we don't do for customers, aspects of how we charge, and all these sort of things are determined through the processes that Ofgem ultimately look after. Yeah. One of the things that's quite often confuses people, a lot of the DNOs that exist in the UK are owned by larger organisations. So there may be a group that maybe has generation businesses and also has a network. There's actually extremely strict rules. It actually comes out of criminal law that ensures that these businesses are separated. So there's distribution network operators don't have relationships with generators as such or other organisations, even if they're part of the group that they're part of. And it's important to understand that because that sometimes gets missed. Yeah. So, as I said before, that's probably about enough without actually confusing people, but it gives you a kind of flavour for how it's structured and what we do.
So, fantastic.
So in addition to what Stuart said, the ENA is also there to represent all of those individual DNO businesses. So we represent their interests when it comes to negotiations with Ofgem, negotiations with different stakeholders, and we're there to provide a consistent message and a consistent voice across all of the UK networks when dealing with different aspects and different stakeholders. And our role really is to try and provide that single point of contact where you can speak to the Energy Networks Association and it's as if you're speaking to all of the networks collectively.
I think also, Gary, it's worth mentioning that distribution network operators, the DNOs, are responsible for keeping the lights on.
Of course.
So if there's any faults on the network, we're the people who are going to respond and make sure that our customers' supplies are restored. And also, we need to be the point of contact for connections. So if a customer's making a new connection, they need to be in contact with the DNO.
Fantastic. So Neil, perhaps I could ask you this second question then. With more and more people in the UK getting solar panels installed on their property and effectively generating their own electricity and reducing their reliance on the grid, what kind of challenges does that present the DNOs?
Thanks, Gary. I think firstly to point out it's both a challenge and a fantastic opportunity. So the more distributed generation we have on the network, the more opportunity we have to run a smart and flexible and efficient network. And customers, of course, can benefit from flexible and smart tariffs. So it's a real opportunity for us. But to enable that to happen, what we need to do is ensure that we actually know where those low carbon technologies, in this case, are going to connect, and importantly, how they're going to be used, even when they're going to be used, to enable us to really manage that network efficiently. How do we do that? We have granular forecasts that actually take us out till 2050 that we develop with customers and wider stakeholders at a really low level, almost down to 1,000 customers in individual roads. And we look at how many will be taking up solar, how many will be installing EVs, how many will be taking out heat pumps, on top of the forecast that we have about the new build that's going to happen in the area, the new commercial developments that are going to be taking place. We add all of that together to build up our forecasts, and then those inform our investment plans. Those investment plans, as Stuart mentioned, are then reviewed by our regulator Ofgem, approved, and that enables us to build the network in the right place at the right time. So the challenge is that it's making sure that we have the right network built in the right place at the right time to cater to customers, but not too much network in the wrong place, because of course everything that we do will end up on the customer's bill. So our challenge and our opportunity is to build and run an efficient network that keeps bills low for our customers.
Absolutely, Neil. Forecasting is key to this, and it's really important that the DNOs are looking at a regional level. We are looking down at properties, we're looking at what their EPC ratings are, what efficiency changes they can make, what their roofs are like. Are they going to be an early adopter of an electric vehicle? And related to that, we're looking at national policies as well. So last September, we had the change where the ban date for the ICE vehicles, the internal combustion engines, was delayed, but actually now with the new government, that's been brought forward again. So we need to follow those policy changes, but also technology changes. So we are looking at whether or not there is going to be solar and storage together, whether or not it's going to be a ground source, a heat, an air source, or a hybrid heat pump. And all of these factors are incorporated into a rich and complex forecast to make sure that we're predicting the future and making sure our network's ready for that meeting that net zero ambition.
Great stuff. So Neil, perhaps I can come to you for the next question then. I understand there are certification schemes in place for the connection of microgeneration equipment like solar panels. And I've heard of G98, I think most people have. And I believe that's available to everyone in the country if they want it. And that would allow them to connect up to 3.68 kilowatts of solar panels, let's say. Why that specific limit? And what schemes are available for those wishing to connect, say, a larger array, or even having a home battery or something like that?
Yes, I think it's good to point out at this stage that those kind of limits that you talked about, 3.68, are historic. And when this was a nascent industry, we knew that we had to support customers and their installers connect as quickly and efficiently as possible. So as a group of DNOs through the ENA, we took a kind of a risk-based approach to what we could connect and manage. So the ultimate aim of us as network operators is that you and your installers can connect and manage all low carbon technologies with as little input from the network operator as possible. So what we decided some years ago now was that taking that risk-based approach, we could allow 3.68 kilowatts, which is roughly 9 solar panels, to connect and manage without the network operator having to sort of look at its network and do a study. We've done similar with electric vehicles. So we allow customers to connect 7 kilowatt EV chargers without the need for us to do a network study. And we have similar arrangements for heat pumps. As new technologies come on board, like batteries, again, we're looking at those all the time and understanding what can we allow just to connect and manage without needing to do any network studies, which might slow the process down. Now that was done at a time when we didn't have smart meters, so we were effectively blind to what was happening on the network, hence that risk-based approach. Of course, now with so many smart meters on the network and the emergence of AI technology, we're beginning to take a more informed view of what can connect. So clearly, many properties could connect more than 3.68 kilowatts without the need for any network intervention. So the smart metering data is really helping us begin to shape our policies going forward. We've recently introduced an online digital system, Connect Direct, which all network operators have signed up to and all installers can use nationally. And that will be the vehicle where we begin to play in that smart metering data to allow us to be smarter in the way in which we connect and manage installations. For those, at the moment, for those larger solar schemes or larger EV chargers, if somebody wanted a larger EV charger, at the moment you have to apply to the network operator. Why is that? It's because while we want to connect and manage those LCTs as quickly as possible and efficiently as possible, we need to be conscious that there are other customers, the neighbours of yourself or whoever looking to connect those LCTs, and we need to make sure the network isn't going to be adversely impacted by those. The larger the generation that's being connected, the greater the opportunity for that to potentially cause what we call disturbance on the network. So, we have to do our due diligence and make sure that those technologies are not going to have an impact. So we have application forms that are there to enable us to get a bit more information from the customer, so we can do our network studies and then, if necessary, make sure the network is ready. What we do more frequently now in the meantime is put G100, those load limiting devices, on customers' LTTs, such that they can still connect and take advantage of that export or that EV charger while we prepare the network in the background.
Yeah, I like that, Neil. It's really, really well put. And I think one of the things that's maybe worth pointing out as well is sometimes you'll see subtle differences from location to location, sometimes within a DNO, sometimes between DNOs, and that's quite often to do with differences in legacy kind of policies. So some of the cables in the ground are 40 years old, older than that in some cases. So there are different standards in different places. So you will see subtle differences. So one house may get a different experience from another one, even though they're asking for the same solar panel to go in. And that's why, it's because of these, quite often because of these legacy differences. But what we are trying to do, and with my innovation hat on, one of the things we're doing through the ENA at the moment is the idea of moving to a connection readiness indicator. And this is a really kind of exciting concept as far as I'm concerned, because it deals a lot of the issues that customers have. And the idea is that we do all the work up front before you've even thought about a heat pump or a solar panel or an electric vehicle, and we proactively go out to customers and say, here is the readiness of your connection. Yeah, and it kind of gets a dialogue going before people actually even think about these things, which does two things. First, it allows us to start to gather information earlier about the likelihood of someone actually taking up these options and specifics of their house and so on. Yeah, but it also stimulates people's interest when they suddenly go, oh, so there's not a problem with me getting an electric vehicle. I thought there was, because I saw on Facebook that there was an issue. So it starts to base the whole decision about low carbon technology adoption is then based on facts, rather than hearsay and beliefs and so on, and there's a lot of work to be done to get to that point, as you can imagine, to proactively do that work on every home in the UK. But that's what we were working on, as a group at the moment, with that aspiration to get to that sort of point.
Thanks for that, Stuart. That actually sounds quite exciting to me. So coming back to today, and Neil, perhaps I can come back to you on this one, with the G99 certification process in particular. I've had many people comment that they say it feels like a black box. You have to kind of declare with the DNO what equipment you want to attach, what size, and then you have to wait to be informed, if you can proceed and if you're allowed the size that you want to connect. And there might be costs as well. And different DNOs take different times to respond. Some can take months, some can take just a few days. Why is the process like this? And why are there sometimes costs associated with going through that process?
Good question, Gary. I think I come back to my earlier comment. When we implemented through the ENA the G98 and the G99 common processes across GB, we assumed that the domestic customers would be using the G98 process, that they would be installing roughly nine panels, and that the G99 process would actually be for mainly commercial customers. So the G99 A1, the kind of short form, actually takes you up to 50 kilowatts. So it's mainly aimed at SMEs, small medium enterprises, and then of course the larger G99 takes you all the way up to 100 megawatts. So what we've seen lately, as you rightly say, is, and quite rightly, some domestic customers can of course fit more than 9 panels on their roof. So they want more than 3.68, which is absolutely fine, and we're of course there to accommodate that. Today, or up until recently, yes, they had to fill in a rather more detailed form, and it comes back to what I said earlier. The larger the array in terms of solar, the potential that it could have a greater impact on the network. Combined with that, the pace of change is so great, the technology advances are so significant that manufacturers are bringing out new models and makes and types of solar, as well as electric vehicle chargers and heat pumps all the time. And those new installations can have unanticipated consequences on our network. So there's kind of two stages to the process. Through the Energy Networks Association, we work with the manufacturers to assess and type test their equipment, such that actually, if you choose one of those type tested pieces of equipment, the process is quicker. So that's an encouragement we have with the manufacturers to talk to the ENA to really ensure that we can assess their equipment before they want to put it on the network to speed up the processes. The second point comes back to the fact that we didn't really anticipate domestic customers and their installers needing to use the G99. So what we're actually beginning to do now through the ENA's Connect Direct system is enable customers to tell us about the installation of larger than 3.68 schemes through the digital tool. And that will enable us to assess those more quickly and in a more standardised way across all of the network operators. You talked about charging. Sometimes, and it is rare, sometimes we will need to do a detailed network study, and as network operators, as we're a licensed organisation, and everything that we do ultimately ends up on all of our bills as consumers, we have to be cost reflective. So the cost that we incur from doing some of these studies sometimes have to be passed on to, in this case, domestic customers. Sometimes we have to come out and witness test, as it's called, actually have to see the installation. Again, we need to account for those costs somewhere, and sometimes they have to be passed on to customers. But the good news, I think, is that as we start to use that smart meter data and inform the way in which we assess these installations, I can see quite quickly that we'll get to a stage where we'll be allowing customers to connect and manage those larger arrays without the need for us to do network studies on a more frequent and regular basis going forward.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And it sounds like what's being planned for the future then is going to be very helpful to domestic customers when they're connecting equipment.
Absolutely.
Neil, maybe I can just add to that. One of the core purposes and functions of the DNO is to make sure that we are supporting our customers' decarbonisation journey to reach those net zero ambitions. That means that we're there to support those customers, but also support the installers. And we do encourage our customers to be using a suitably qualified installer. So there are organisations who are offering registrations such as MCS, and there are other trade bodies where those qualified installers are registered, and that's where our customers need to be looking to make sure they're getting the right people to install their solar panels, to install their electric vehicle chargers or heat pumps.
Okay, thanks Gillian. So Neil, you mentioned earlier about Connect Direct, and Stuart, you talked about connection readiness, which sounds like, if I sort of bring the two together, Connect Direct is like an enhancement of today's processes perhaps, and connection readiness is all about, I guess, getting ahead of the game. So Dan, maybe I could ask you a question. Could you expand on what actually Connect Direct is and how that will help everyone?
Yeah, no problem at all. So Connect Direct is something that's been born from all of the networks coming together and saying we want to improve this process for our customers, we want to make it faster, we want to make it easier for installers to operate and to apply for a connection application. And we've inherited some legacy items, as we said, the G98, which is limited to 3.68 kilowatts. We needed a way to go beyond that and give domestic customers what they need when they need it. So we've created a digital platform, and what we've tried to do is import all of the decision logic from all the DNOs into the platform. So actually it can run a series of checks on behalf of the DNOs and is capable of giving an instant response back to an installer. So an installer can submit a much reduced application form into the Connect Direct system. It will run those checks, and then it will decide whether you can go ahead with your connection as is, or whether we need to ask the DNO if there's any further work that's required. It will then pass that application to the DNO through a digital connection. The DNO then has all of the information they need at their fingertips. It's not written on a paper form, it's all in a digital format. It can go directly into their systems. They can then answer the questions much more quickly and more efficiently than they have been able to previously, and then crucially pass that answer back through Connect Direct system so the installer receives it on the platform that they originally made the request on. So it's really smoothing out that process between the installer communication and the DNO at the other end. And what's more, because it's done through the ENA, it's across all of the GB DNOs and in Northern Ireland as well. So it's one platform for wherever you're applying to connect anywhere in the country.
That sounds pretty exciting, Dan. I heard Neil mention earlier about an equipment register. Is that part of Connect Direct as well?
Yeah, absolutely. We've rolled all of that together into a single platform, so it's a single point for not only installers but also manufacturers. So if they want to edit the devices that are currently in the register, if they want to add any new devices, or even any new technologies as new manufacturers come up with new solutions for decarbonisation, all of that can be registered in a single platform. The huge benefit for that is that you don't then have to register each of those devices with each individual DNO. It can be done centrally through ENA. And what's more, because those devices have been pre-checked and pre-authorised, when it comes to the connection application, we just need the installer to tell us what it is they're installing, what's the model number, and we can pull all of the technical details from our database. So we're making that application at the front end much easier for installers as well by connecting with manufacturers and getting all of their devices registered on our platform.
Okay, this is really good, and it tells me that ENA is getting really serious about enabling people to decarbonise their homes as quickly as possible. Okay, so I need to bring this one up. Export limits, they're a real hot topic amongst my viewers, and I had a lot of the questions I received were about that. So maybe, Gillian, perhaps I could ask you this. What are the factors that lead to these export limitations for customers? And actually, I'm hearing in some cases that customers have been limited, the limits have been set to 0. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So Gary, a customer may choose to have an export limitation, and that may come subsequent to some information in response to a connection application where the DNO says, look, we've got limited capacity available here, and it's the most efficient way forward for that customer to adopt an export limitation. And it's on the premise that they're still saving, because they're still saving on their bills because they've got the generation on their side, but it actually limits the stress, the influence on the distribution network, and that can avoid costly reinforcements on the network. And the way that that export limitation is realised could be through software or could be through a hardware device between the generator and the point of connection. And it sets that cap on the amount of power that goes back on to the grid, goes back onto the distribution network. And the ways that we've got working, so for example, the ENA Connect Direct, that also allows for export limitation to be factored in, so it's integrated already. So the reason why it's useful to have that export limitation is that there are certain situations on our network where the network can't cope with the full export. And that can come about because of the capacity of our network. And that might be to prevent damage. So we need to ensure that our equipment, our cables and our transformers are not overloaded. Second reason is about voltage management. So we need to make sure that the voltage that our customers receive is appropriate for the proper operation and functioning of their devices. So we need to manage voltage. The third reason is about power quality. Again, we need the power quality on the network to be appropriate so that customers' devices are going to operate correctly. And all of those three factors can be affected by the export. And by having an export limitation, we can make sure that we work within the capability of our network. And that's why it's really important. You mentioned about 0 kilowatts. Now, it could be that the conditions on that network are that they just can't accommodate any more. And that's why you might have a 0 kilowatt export limit.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Just as a follow-up question to that then, is it possible that for a particular customer that their export limit could be increased in the future perhaps?
Absolutely, Gary. Things are changing on our networks really rapidly, and the customer is able to reapply to see if we can change. We need to be able to go back and reassess the network. But what we're seeing is that our networks, we're increasing the capacity on our networks, but also there's a possibility that somebody down the road has disconnected something, some generation, or the demand on the network has increased, which means that we can accommodate more generation. So very much the customer can reapply. Now we help with that somewhat with the open data. Making as much information available to our customers is key in our future operations, so that we are empowering customers to make the type of decisions that we're talking about here. So open data, looking at the utilisation of our networks to see if that capacity is available. But also, Stuart's been talking about some of the innovation that we're doing, and tools are available also to visualise our network. So Northern Power Grid have an auto design tool. That means that customers can actually self-serve with their connections. They can go down and look at the electrical assets on their street, at the end of their street. And there's a red, amber, green facility there, so they can see if the capacity is available. And a quick check on that might indicate that some capacity has been released, and that's the opportunity they've got to apply to remove or certainly reduce those export limits.
All right, that sounds really encouraging. Are those kind of tools available from other DNOs as well?
So Auto Design is a specific tool for Northern Power Grid, but all DNOs are either offering or certainly developing these tools so that customers can self-serve.
Well, that's good to know, and I think it's great that consumers can actually get access to this kind of data. Okay, so Neil, maybe I could come back to you then on that question. With an export limit being in place, does that still mean that a customer, if they wanted to, could install a very large solar array and a very large battery to go with that and still be in compliance with that? There wouldn't be any problems.
No, absolutely, Gary. And the great news is that's happening all the time now. Indeed, we see more applications for a combination of battery and solar than we do just solar now, because the benefit of using the export in the house rather than trying to sell it on the wholesale market is hugely beneficial to the customer. So what we're actually talking about here is the net export. So if you are utilising the power from, you're generating the solar in the day, and when there's spill, it's supporting the battery, and then the battery is then providing that excess power in the evening, or indeed charging the car, or you have a V2G charger, because the V2G chargers are accommodated in the ENA's Connect Direct system as well. So this rich ecosystem we're now seeing of smart technologies, as long as the net export behind the inverter is kept to whatever the limit has been agreed with the network operator, you can indeed have those larger schemes. It's happening on retrofit, but it's increasingly happening on new build. And what you're going to see with the Future Home Standard, which is coming in next year, which will require new builds to have both solar and accommodation for EV, a lot of the house builders are also incorporating batteries into that now. So with a thermally efficient new build and solar and a battery and your electric vehicle, you're going to see a revolution in the way in which customers manage their properties and keep their bills low.
Yeah, that's great. So Stuart, I think my next question is for you then, because your role is all about looking at the future.
Yeah.
So looking at the wider picture then, who is responsible for future planning and development of electrical networks in the UK? And how is that carried out in the light of increased load from, soon to be millions of EV chargers, heat pumps, and also increased export from millions of domestic solar arrays?
Yeah, that's the holy grail of questions on that one. You were hearing before about our existing processes. So each DNO on a regular basis does a whole load of forecast scenarios. So we do loads of stakeholder engagement right down to street level, local authorities, housing associations, all sorts of different organisations, and pull together a model of what's going to happen. And we tie that together with different sort of potential outcomes, how likely people are to adopt low carbon technologies, and we pull that all together and create a forecast for every one of our substations effectively, yeah? And we basically do a calculation of when will it need to be changed, yeah? The other thing we do increasingly as well is factor in flexibility, which maybe we're talking about later on actually, yeah? But effectively we pull that all together and that gives us a forecast. And as we were saying earlier on, we have to convince Ofgem that that process has been thorough and that additional investment in the network will be needed. But if we can get over that hurdle, then we can go ahead and we invest in that reinforcement. So there's a significant programme of investment underway at the moment, preparing for low carbon technology uptake as we speak. And at the end of the day, you're talking about a doubling of the demand on the network, so that's not insignificant. And the key thing is that we're working on it now for the demands that are going to hit us in a few years' time.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah.
So one final question then, and Stuart, perhaps this is best directed at you. Could we talk about network flexibility? And that's where, of course, demand is matched against the available supply of renewables. I've seen some energy providers now offering on certain days perhaps a free hour of electricity and things like this. And I guess that's when there's an abundance of renewable energy. And then at the other end, when you've got stress on the grid perhaps because there's limited supply of renewable energies in the mix, you've got schemes like Demand Flexibility Service, effectively incentivizing customers to reduce their demand. Mm-hmm. What are the plans for DNOs in this whole area then of network flexibility?
Yeah, it's a very pertinent question. Flexibility is already a big thing for DNOs. At this point, there's about 4.5 gigawatts worth of flexibility in being tendered. I think it's something like 3 gigawatts contracted by DNOs in the UK for flexibility. And it's actually, there's a lot of nuances to flexibility a lot of people don't necessarily see. There's a number of use cases for flexibility. One of the first ones actually in the home. All this export limiting stuff we're talking about is actually flexibility. So there's a and I won't go into any more of that, but there's a use case for flexibility in the home itself. The second use case is the one that you mentioned, which is there's too much generation versus demand at a particular point in time. It's more efficient to bring more demand on to reduce the amount of curtailed generation, and that's all about keeping the system efficient. And the system operator I mentioned right at the very beginning is the person that kind of looks after that. They make sure that balance is there. But there's the next thing though is that use of flexibility ultimately will create challenges for networks, because every bit of the network in the country, we rely on diversity, as in not everything is on at the same time, to size the network. Yeah, that's how things have been done, like going back generations. Yeah, as soon as you start to introduce signals that say switch everything on now, that diversity goes. So suddenly you can be overloading networks that are only being overloaded because there's an incentive to bring as much as you can on in a particular period. So we need to use flexibility to counter that effect, so we don't end up, so we may in certain situations be paying to match the flexibility that's being used in specific geographical areas because it causes problems. So that's kind of the three use cases. The main thing we're using flexibility for though is to make sure, you mentioned we were talking about forecasting before.
Yes.
There's a lot of uncertainty in all of that. And there's lots of places where we might, for the sake of an extra 1 megawatt on a particular substation, we might have to do a £20 million project. And if that turns out to be 999 kilowatts, we might not have to do that project. So using flexibility and contracting with people to turn demand down demand and turn demand up at the right times can allow us to wait until we're certain about the need for that particular investment. Now, I have to say, with the rate of growth in the UK, that scenario is becoming less and less relevant, because in most places it's pretty certain you're going to go through these thresholds and have to reinforce the network. But there's another use for flexibility, which is making sure we can schedule all that work to be as efficient as possible. So you don't want to be jumping around the country doing a little upgrade here, a little upgrade there. If you can use flexibility to try to pull these things together and touch the network once, and do that reinforcement and use flexibility to keep it going, and possibly use flexibility afterwards as well to keep it as efficient as possible, you've got yet another use case for flexibility. So it's such an important topic. There's a whole new thing I think called a distribution system operator, which is, if you like, a subset of what a DNO is, that's been set up in across all of the DNOs in the UK to manage that very aspect of how do you use flexibility. So it is a big thing already. It's just not necessarily as visible as some of the stuff that's being done around about system balancing, which is the initial use case you presented. So, and an exciting area, lots of consultations and all sorts of stuff going on at the moment about this in terms of who looks after it. There's a new market facilitator that's been proposed and is currently being specified. That'll be another entity that comes in to provide sort of independence in terms of how these flexibility markets are operated. And I think we're going to see a lot of change and development and growth in this space over the next few years to top up what we've already got there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Who said energy was dull? It really isn't. I think it's really exciting times, and not just for the energy system, but actually consumers playing their part in it and actually understanding what part they are playing. I think it's fantastic. So listen, thank you very much for your time today. I know you're all very busy, and I really appreciate you taking a couple of hours out to answer the questions that I've put to you. And I'll probably be delving into the sort of higher order topic of energy in my videos. So if it's okay, I would love to have the opportunity to come back and perhaps pose more questions to you as we get into the detail. But for the meantime, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's been great. Yep.
I hope you enjoyed the interview. I certainly learned a lot about the work of the DNOs and also the role of Energy Networks Association. I've placed links to everything discussed in the video description, together with some other useful links for anyone wanting to find out more. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and if you have any questions to the DNOs or any feedback you'd like to make, please comment below and I'll pass all the comments on to them. Thanks for watching and see you soon.